Hi there, welcome back to Haunting Veils. Tonight, we face a mystery born not from words, but from silence. A torn photograph, half missing, half forgotten, yet carrying within it the power to destroy reputations or reveal a killer. In Poirot's world, nothing is ever accidental. Who tore the photograph, and why was it hidden? Was it an act of fear, revenge, or desperation? One small fragment may hold the face of truth or the mask of a murderer. Every shadow in this case whispers deceit, and every clue pushes Poirot closer to a revelation that no one expected. This is the whisper of the torn photograph, a Hercule Poirot mystery. And before the final piece of the picture is revealed, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because the truth, just like the photograph, hides in fragments, and only here on Haunting Veils will it be pieced together. Chapter 1. The Photograph Torn in Silence. The rain had come down steadily over London that evening, not with the violence of a storm, but with the quiet persistence that seeps into the bones of the city. Street lamps glistened in the wet, their reflections like small golden flames trembling in pools along the cobbles. Inside Whitehaven Mansions, Hercule Poirot sat as though the weather did not exist at all. The great detective, so fastidious in every detail, leaned forward in his armchair, his green silk dressing gown folded neatly about him. On the small table beside him rested a porcelain cup of chocolate, steaming faintly. He had been reading, though not one of the adventure novels Captain Hastings so adored. Tonight, his eyes had been lost within the pages of the Murder of Roger Ackroyd. Not in truth a case, but a work of fiction that amused him endlessly. Poirot had been persuaded, once, to allow Dame Agatha Christie herself to pen certain adventures for him, and though he grumbled that she did not always catch the elegance of his mustaches, he secretly relished her artistry. A knock sounded. Poirot looked up at once, the lift of his brows betraying a faint irritation. He detested interruptions when his mind was engaged upon a problem, even if that problem was only the artistry of his own portrayal. "Entrez," he called, setting the book aside with immaculate precision. The door opened, and Miss Lemon appeared, her face as composed as ever, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. She carried a small parcel, carefully wrapped, which she held with the delicacy of someone bearing a relic. "This came for you, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "Deliver by hand. No return address." Poirot's mustaches twitched. Ah, the mysterious arrival. Always it begins in such a way. "Put it down, if you please." She obeyed, setting the package upon the table. Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs. With neat fingers, he undid the brown paper, lifting it away as though he performed surgery. Inside, between sheets of stiff card, lay a photograph. Or rather, half a photograph. The image had been violently torn, the edges jagged. It showed the face of a young woman, pale and fine-featured, her eyes dark and grave. One side of her face was cut away entirely, leaving her expression broken, incomplete. Poirot bent close, his gray-green eyes alive with interest. A torn photograph. But why torn, and why sent to Hercule Poirot? Voila, the game is begun. Miss Lemon said nothing. She was not one to indulge in speculation. But Poirot, already absorbed, studied the back of the photograph. No inscription, no date, only the faint smell of paper long enclosed in a drawer. He turned it again, lifting it towards the lamplight. "Observe, Miss Lemon. The tear, it is not casual. It is deliberate. It removes not merely the other half of the face, but another figure perhaps. Someone beside her. The photograph. It once held two, but now it bears only one. Someone wishes me to see this woman in isolation, as though the missing half would tell the truth they wish hidden." Miss Lemon gave a faint shrug. "Shall I make inquiries with the porter, sir?" "Non, None. Whoever left it wished to remain unseen. But my faithful Miss Lemon, it is always the small details that betray. Look, the paper, it is of foreign make. The sheen is not of England. I think perhaps it is from Belgium itself. Curious, is it not? Poirot sat again, his cup untouched, his thoughts racing. A torn photograph. It was a whisper from the past. He remembered other cases, a scrap of evidence overlooked by all save him, a missing letter in the mystery of the blue train, a seemingly trivial trinket in peril at End House. Always it was in the smallest fragments that truth revealed itself. He leaned back, hands pressed together in his familiar steeple. We shall see, ma chère. Whoever she is, she will not remain hidden for long. Poirot will restore what has been torn. It was 2 days later when the matter ceased to be merely curious and became deadly. Poirot had received an invitation to dine at the home of Lady Margaret Darrow, a society hostess known for her elaborate soirees. Though Poirot often declined such invitations, he had accepted this one for a reason. Lady Darrow's note had been written with a peculiar urgency. You will forgive the liberty, but I must see you in Poirot. There are matters of great delicacy. Please come. The evening was warm despite the rain, and Poirot arrived punctually, his patent leather shoes gleaming as though polished by the sun itself. The house, in Grosvenor Square, was all marble and chandeliers, filled with the gentle murmur of conversation, the clink of glass upon glass. Poirot was led into the drawing-room, where Lady Darrow herself greeted him. She was a woman in her 50s, stately, with a proud bearing. Yet Poirot's little eyes missed nothing. The tremor of her hand as she touched his arm, the faint shadow beneath her eyes. Monsieur Poirot, she said, lowering her voice. Thank you for coming. I know you will understand. Madam, I understand nothing until it is explained, he said gently. But you are troubled. That much is plain. She led him aside, away from the company. From the folds of her gown, she drew a small envelope and pressed it into his hand. Do not open it here. Later, you will see why. Poirot bowed. I obey. They were interrupted by the arrival of others, and Lady Darrow slipped away. Poirot placed the envelope into his pocket with delicate care. The evening passed with polite talk, though Poirot noticed Lady Darrow scarcely touched her food. Her eyes strayed often to him, as though she longed to speak again but dared not. When at last Poirot returned to Whitehaven Mansions, he wasted no time. He opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and another torn photograph. The letter read simply, She is in danger. The truth is hidden in what is missing. You alone can save her. Poirot's brows drew together. He placed the photograph beside the first. This second fragment bore the other half, the figure of a man. Tall, his face stern, his arm about the young woman. But still the tear was jagged, and though together they formed one image, a thin strip was gone, the space between them. Poirot whispered to himself. The whisper of the torn photograph. It is as though the photograph itself wishes to speak. What was between them? Love? Hatred? Or death? The next morning, Miss Lemon entered his office with an expression that was almost, though not quite, disturbed. There is news, sir, she said. Lady Margaret Darrow was found dead in her study this morning. The papers are calling it suicide. Poirot rose slowly, his face grave. Suicide? Non. When one sends for Hercule Poirot with trembling hand, it is not to leave the stage before he arrives. It is murder, Miss Lemon. Murder concealed as despair. And it begins with a torn photograph. His mind, precise as ever, set to work. Who was the woman in the picture? Who was the man? And what terrible truth had Lady Darrow feared enough to summon him? He thought of death on the Nile, where love and greed had walked hand in hand. He thought of 5 Little Pigs, where the past itself had risen to accuse the living. Always the photograph. It bound the past and the present in silence. Poirot turned to Miss Lemon, his voice firm. "We must go at once to Lady Darrow's house. There we will find the beginning of the trail." For the photograph whispers, but Hercule Poirot, he listens. And so it was that the little Belgian, with his immaculate mustaches and his brain like a jeweled machine, stepped once more into the labyrinth of human hearts. A photograph torn in silence had come into his keeping, and he knew well that before it was restored, blood would be spilt and secrets long buried would rise again. Chapter 2: Shadows Between the Faces. The morning after Lady Darrow's death was gray, with clouds stretched low over London as though the city itself mourned. Poirot and Miss Lemon arrived at Grosvenor Square in a hired motor. The house, usually alive with the comings and goings of society, now lay subdued. Curtains were drawn. Policemen moved quietly in and out, their boots sounding heavily upon the marble steps. Inside, the air carried the faint sharpness of extinguished smoke and the perfume of roses that stood wilting in crystal vases. The drawing rooms were hushed, their chandeliers dim. Poirot was met by Inspector Jameson, a man of square build and steady eyes, who held a certain deference for Poirot, though he did not always share his methods. "Monsieur Poirot," Jameson said gravely, "a tragedy. Lady Darrow was found in her study. A revolver by her hand, a note upon her desk. It appears straightforward." "Appearances, Inspector, are like the mirror," Poirot replied softly. "They show us much, yet they can deceive. If you will permit, I should like to see the study." Jameson led him along a corridor paneled in dark oak. The study door stood open. Inside, the heavy curtains had been drawn back to admit the pale light of morning. Upon the carpet, a dark stain had seeped, the mark of finality. Lady Darrow herself had already been removed, but her presence still seemed to fill the room. Poirot moved with quiet precision, his eyes traveling over every detail. The desk was orderly, save for one sheet of paper and the revolver beside it. He bent, examining the weapon without touching. "It is her revolver, Inspector." "Yes, kept in the drawer. Servants confirm." Poirot glanced at the note. The handwriting was large and uneven, as though written in haste or under strain. "Forgive me. The burden is too great. No name, no explanation." Poirot pursed his lips. So often in life, the handwriting speaks louder than the words. This, it is the hand of distress, yes, but also of uncertainty. She does not write, "I take my life." She writes only of burden. It is the language of one who is compelled, not one who chooses. Jameson raised an eyebrow. "You suspect murder?" Poirot's mustaches twitched. "I suspect nothing. I observe. And I observe that Lady Darrow sent for me. She placed into my hand the torn photograph, the letter. That, Inspector, is not the action of one intending to depart the world. Non. She feared, but she also hoped. And hope is not the companion of suicide." He turned slowly, letting his eyes travel across the study. There, upon a side table, he saw a small silver frame. Within it was a photograph, intact. It showed a young woman, the same dark-eyed beauty as in the torn image. Poirot drew nearer. "Voila," he murmured, "the woman of the photograph. In full." Jameson came beside him. "Lady Darrow's niece, Miss Clara Lockwood. She lives here, has done since her parents died years ago." Poirot studied the picture. Clara Lockwood. So this was the face whispered to him through torn paper. The same grave eyes, the same fine profile. And if the second half showed a man, then perhaps the secret lay between them. "Where is Mademoiselle Lockwood now?" Poirot asked. "In her rooms upstairs." Shocked, naturally. "I've yet to question her fully." Poirot inclined his head. "Then with your permission, Inspector, I will speak with her. Gently, très doucement. The truth she will not tell to the heavy tread of the law." but to Hercule Poirot, perhaps. Miss Clara Lockwood received them in a sitting room upstairs, a chamber filled with pale sunlight and the scent of lavender. She was indeed the woman of the photograph, young, no more than 23, with hair dark as raven's wing and eyes that seemed always to carry shadows. She rose when Poirot entered, her movements graceful yet subdued. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I know who you are. My aunt spoke of you. Your aunt was a woman of discernment," Poirot replied gently, bowing. "And she has left behind questions, mademoiselle. Questions whispered to me in a photograph torn in two." She started, her hands clasping tightly. "You received it then? I thought perhaps—" She stopped, biting her lip. "You know the photograph?" Poirot asked, his voice silken. "Yes." She faltered. "It was mine. It was taken years ago. My aunt, she must have found it. But why did she send it to you? I do not understand." Poirot drew from his pocket the two halves, placing them gently upon the small table between them. "Voilà! United, they show you, mademoiselle, and a man. Who is he?" For a long moment she was silent. Her eyes moved to the window, where raindrops traced their slow descent upon the glass. At last she whispered, "His name is Edward Bracknell." Poirot inclined his head. "And he is—" "My fiancé." Jameson gave a small exclamation. "Then where is he now, Miss Lockwood?" Clara hesitated. "He is abroad. On business. At least, that is what I was told." Poirot leaned forward. "Mademoiselle, forgive me if I intrude, but your aunt feared something. She feared enough to place this image in my hands." "Why?" Clara's eyes filled suddenly with tears. "I do not know. My aunt disapproved of Edward. She said he was not trustworthy. But I loved him. I still do. Surely that is not reason for—" Her voice broke. Poirot's expression softened. "The heart, it blinds us, does it not? In the mystery of the blue train, I saw how love can lead a young woman to folly, to danger. Tell me, mademoiselle, how long have you known this Edward Bracknell?" 2 years. We met at a concert. He was charming, attentive. He spoke of travels, of fortunes in South America. My aunt believed him reckless, but I believed him true." Poirot tapped the two halves of the photograph. "And yet, this tearing. Who did it?" Clara shook her head. "Not I. I could never destroy such a thing. Perhaps my aunt. She wished to part us, to sever the bond." Poirot rose, moving to the fireplace. Upon the mantel stood a small porcelain figurine, a shepherdess with one arm broken away. Poirot's eyes lingered on it, then returned to Clara. "Tell me, mademoiselle, did your aunt ever speak of danger? Of some threat connected with Monsieur Bracknell?" Clara hesitated. Then she nodded faintly. "She said he had debts, that he was entangled with dangerous people. She begged me to end the engagement, but I would not." Poirot's little eyes gleamed. "Debts? Dangerous associates. It is often so, is it not, Inspector? The man with the charming manner, the smile, the empty pockets, and sometimes the full revolver." Jameson frowned. "If Bracknell is abroad, he'll need tracing. But for now, Miss Lockwood, we must ask you to remain here." Clara bowed her head. "I have nowhere else to go." When they returned to the study, Poirot stood very still, his eyes traveling once more about the room. Suddenly he moved to the desk, lifting carefully a small blotting pad. He held it to the light. There, faintly impressed upon the paper, were words not belonging to the suicide note. Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, someone wrote here," and tore away the page. "But the impression remains. Inspector, with your kind assistance, we shall reveal it." They applied the simplest of methods, shading lightly across the page with pencil until the indentations revealed themselves. Slowly, words emerged. The photograph, if it is found, all is lost. Bracknell must not know. Poirot's mustaches quivered. So, Lady Darrow wrote these words. Not to end her life, but to warn. And what happens, Inspector, to those who know too much? They are silenced. Jameson's jaw tightened. Then Edward Bracknell may not be abroad at all. Precisely. That afternoon, Poirot paid a call upon a friend, Chief Inspector Japp, his old ally from cases past. Over tea in Japp's cluttered office, Poirot laid out the torn photograph, the letter, the hidden message. Japp whistled softly. You think Bracknell did for Lady Darrow? If he was mixed up with the wrong crowd, it stands to reason. But we'll need more than whispers on paper. Poirot sipped delicately from his cup. Ah, but whispers, my dear Japp, can be louder than cannon if one knows how to listen. The photograph, it speaks of a bond. The tear, it speaks of division. Between the faces lies the truth. I must discover what Lady Darrow feared. Japp grinned. Same old Poirot. All right, I'll put men on Bracknell. If he's in London, we'll flush him out. Poirot inclined his head. Merci. Meanwhile, I must look not only at what is present, but what is missing. The strip torn between the faces. That is where the secret lies. That night, back in his apartment, Poirot sat once more with the two halves of the photograph laid before him. The lamplight shone softly, catching the edges of the torn paper. He studied them as though they were maps of an unknown land. To tear a photograph, he murmured, is not merely to destroy. It is to choose. One preserves, one erases. Lady Darrow preserved her niece. She erased the man. And yet, she kept both halves. Why? To show me, perhaps, that together they reveal the whole truth. But what of the strip between? What face, what figure, what word lies hidden there? His eyes grew distant, recalling past puzzles. The slip of paper in the ABC murders. The wasp and death in the clouds. Always, it was the detail overlooked. Poirot leaned back, his hands in their steeple. It whispers to me, this photograph. And I, Hercule Poirot, I will listen until it speaks aloud. The night deepened, and the rain fell once more upon the city. Somewhere in that darkness, Edward Bracknell moved unseen. Somewhere, the torn photograph bound together the living and the dead. And Poirot knew the shadow between the faces was no mere strip of paper. It was the shadow of murder. Chapter 3, Whispers of Betrayal. The next day dawned with a brittle clarity, as though the rain had washed London clean only to reveal the harder truths beneath. The city bustled, yet to Hercule Poirot it seemed the world had narrowed to a single question. Who was Edward Bracknell, and what shadow lay between his face and Clara Lockwood's in the torn photograph? Poirot sat at his breakfast table, his eggs arranged with mathematical precision upon the plate, his toast cut into neat triangles. Hastings was absent, abroad on some matter of business, and Poirot missed his friend's hearty appetite and guileless observations. Yet solitude was no hardship when the little gray cells were fully engaged. Miss Lemon entered promptly, carrying a slip of paper. A message from Inspector Jameson, sir. They traced Edward Bracknell. He is not abroad. He has been seen in London these past days. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ah, so the fiancé returns from the land of convenient alibis. And where is he found? At the Savoy Hotel. Mais naturellement, Poirot murmure. Where else does the charming but impecunious gentleman reside than among the splendor of the wealthy? He must shine, you see, like the butterfly upon borrowed light. He set down his fork. Miss Lemon, if you please, summon a motor. Hercule Poirot will go to the Savoy. The Savoy's marble halls gleamed, its chandeliers casting cascades of light upon the polished floors. Guests moved in elegant fashion, and among them Poirot was not out of place, for his patent leather shoes shone with rival brilliance. Edward Bracknell was discovered in the lounge, a tall man with a smooth countenance and eyes that glittered rather than shone. He rose with studied charm as Poirot approached. "Monsieur Poirot," he exclaimed, his voice warm yet calculated. "An honor indeed. I have heard of you, of course. To what do I owe this pleasure? Poirot bowed slightly. It is not pleasure, monsieur. It is duty. Lady Darrow, you have heard of her death. Bracknell's expression shifted, but only for a fraction of a second. Yes. Shocking. Most shocking. Poor woman. But she was always of fragile temperament. So I am told. Poirot's little eyes twinkled coldly. So you are told, but not so you believe? Or do you repeat merely what is convenient? Bracknell's smile thinned. Surely, monsieur, you do not mean to suggest. Poirot seated himself uninvited, folding his hands. I suggest nothing. I inquire. Tell me, Monsieur Bracknell, when last did you see Lady Darrow? Bracknell hesitated. Weeks ago. She never liked me. She thought me unsuitable for her niece. It is an old story, is it not? The protective aunt, the disapproved suitor. And yet, Poirot said softly, the aunt is dead. And the suitor is here, in London, though all believed him abroad. Bracknell's eyes hardened. If you are implying. Non, non. I imply nothing. But I observe, monsieur, that you have debts. I observe also that Lady Darrow, in her wisdom, may have stood between you and Mademoiselle Lockwood's inheritance. And I observe, most curious of all, that she placed into my hand a torn photograph. You and a young lady, together. Why should she do this, I wonder? For the first time, Bracknell's composure faltered. His gaze flickered. A photograph? I know nothing of it. Poirot leaned closer, his voice a whisper. Perhaps you know, perhaps you do not. But understand this, the photograph whispers still. And Hercule Poirot, he listens. He rose, his bow precise. Au revoir, Monsieur Bracknell. For now. As Poirot turned away, he felt rather than saw the tension ripple through the man. Yes, there was fear there, beneath the polish. Fear, and the whisper of betrayal. Later that afternoon, Poirot called once more upon Clara Lockwood. She received him in the same lavender-scented sitting room, her dark eyes wide with unease. You have seen Edward? She asked at once. I have, mademoiselle. He is in London, not abroad. A faint color rose in her cheeks. He told me he would return soon. He must have wished to surprise me. Poirot regarded her steadily. Mademoiselle, forgive me if I wound, but do you not see? He deceived you. He was here while your aunt lived her final days in fear. He concealed himself, and you knew nothing. Clara's voice trembled. You do not understand. He had reasons. He told me once that there were men who pursued him. If he kept silent, it was to protect me. Poirot's mustaches quivered. Protect you, or protect himself. The two, they're not always the same. Tears glimmered in her eyes. You speak as if you were guilty. Poirot's voice was gentle. I speak as one who has seen many women suffer because they believed too much in the goodness of a charming smile. In Sad Cypress, in Five Little Pigs, I saw how love blinds, how it betrays. Take care, mademoiselle, lest your devotion lead you also into darkness. Clara turned away, her hands clenched. You are wrong. Edward loves me. Poirot sighed inwardly. Perhaps. Or perhaps he loves only what you will one day inherit. He left her then, but his heart was heavy, for he saw the truth dawning in her eyes, though she fought against it with all her will. The photograph had whispered betrayal to Lady Darrow, and it whispered the same to him. That evening Poirot walked alone along the embankment, the lamps casting golden pools upon the wet pavement. He thought of Bracknell's smoothness, of Clara's tears, of Lady Darrow's trembling hand as she pressed the envelope into his keeping. He paused, gazing out at the Thames, its waters dark and restless beneath the lights. Between the faces, he murmured, between the torn halves lies the secret. What did Lady Darrow fear? What truth was hidden in that narrow strip? And then, as if in answer, the image returned to his mind. Clara, Edward, standing close, yet not touching. The tear had removed the space between. What had been there? A hand? A symbol? Another face, even? Poirot's eyes narrowed. It is not only the faces that matter. It is the space between. In that space, it holds a betrayal. The following day brought news from Inspector Jameson. Bracknell had been seen visiting a certain gaming club in Soho, a place of ill repute known for its debts and its clientele of desperate men. Poirot accompanied Jameson to the establishment, a dimly lit house where smoke curled heavy in the air and the click of ivory chips rang sharp upon the tables. At one corner sat Bracknell, his face pale, his hands restless. He played not with success, but with desperation. "Observe," Poirot murmured to Jameson. "This is not the leisure of a gentleman. This is the struggle of a drowning man." Bracknell lost again, cursed under his breath, and rose suddenly, pushing away from the table. He strode towards the door, and there found Poirot waiting. Bracknell froze, his eyes flashing. "You again?" "Mais oui," Poirot said smoothly. "And always I am in the place where truth walks. Tell me, monsieur, how does one gamble with empty pockets?" Bracknell's jaw tightened. "That is my affair. Your debts," Poirot said softly. "They are large, are they not? So large that even love cannot pay them. Unless, of course, one were to marry a young woman of fortune. But then, there is the ant who stands between." Bracknell's eyes blazed. "You dare?" Poirot lifted a hand. "I dare only to observe. Lady Darrow is dead. Her niece is unprotected. And you, Monsieur Bracknell, are a man in need. If that is not betrayal, then what is?" Bracknell turned sharply, pushing past, and was gone into the night. Back in his rooms, Poirot sat long in silence. The photograph lay before him, the torn halves joined, yet the strip between missing. He stared at it until the lines blurred, until the figures seemed to whisper. At last he spoke aloud, as if to an unseen companion. "Yes, betrayal. That is the whisper. But by whom? By Bracknell, or by another? Lady Darrow feared him, yes. But perhaps she feared also someone else. For why send a photograph to me, unless it contained more than a mere likeness?" His mind traveled back through other cases, other betrayals. Death on the Nile, where lovers plotted together. Lord Edgware dies, where deceit lay behind a mask. Always, it was those who smiled most sweetly who betrayed most deeply. Poirot leaned forward, his eyes bright. "The truth, it is there. It is waiting, and soon it will speak." Outside, the bells of London told the hour. In the city's restless heart, men whispered, women wept, and secrets stirred. And in Whitehaven mansions, Hercule Poirot listened to the whispers of betrayal, knowing that they would lead him at last to the hand that had torn the photograph, and to the murderer who hid behind its silence. Chapter 4: Shadows Among the Shards. The hush that fell upon the drawing room was not unlike the silence that comes after the last note of a piano sonata has faded, a silence that holds both release and tension. Poirot sat upright in his chair, his gloved fingertips together, the faint gleam of satisfaction in his dark eyes. Hastings, however, remained restless, pacing near the window with the torn photograph in his hand. The lamplight struck across the ragged edges of the paper, throwing long, sharp shadows on the carpet, as though the photograph itself were whispering its secrets into the room. "I cannot see it, Poirot," Hastings muttered. "The picture is torn. What can it possibly prove? A photograph without its other half is nothing but a scrap." Poirot's gaze lingered on the fragment. "Non, mon ami. A torn photograph is like a broken mirror. What is missing is as important as what remains. Look closely, and you will see not absence, but presence. It is in the silence, in the omission, that truth whispers." Lady Winthrop had withdrawn earlier in the evening, her eyes rimmed red, her demeanor fragile, yet curiously restrained. Inspector Grant, summoned once again from Scotland Yard, had pressed Poirot to share his findings. But the little Belgian had demurred, insisting that shadows were best studied in stillness, that premature conclusions were but hasty steps on treacherous ground. Now, in the quiet of the house, Hastings leaned against the mantelpiece, sighing heavily. "You've compared this case, Poirot, to the murder of Roger Ackroyd more than once. Do you mean to say the murderer is someone right under our noses?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui, Hastings. But let us not rush. You recall also in the mystery of the blue train, how what seemed most evident concealed the subtle hand of deception, such as our current puzzle. Always, the human heart betrays itself, and no photograph, no matter how torn, can conceal it forever." He rose from his chair with surprising energy, the silk of his dressing gown whispering as he moved. Taking the fragment from Hastings, he turned it over. The faint embossing of a photographic studio could be discerned along the back edge. Voila! Our clue is stamped in ink, a mark of origin. Do not forget, mon cher, the smallest detail is often the most revealing. The following morning brought storm clouds that brooded heavily over the countryside. Poirot, with Hastings beside him, paid a discreet visit to the photography studio in the village. The proprietor, a thin man with pince-nez and ink-stained fingers, blinked in surprise when presented with the fragment. "Yes, I know this work," he said, adjusting his spectacles. "It was taken here not 6 months ago. A family portrait." But he hesitated. "I recall the occasion well. There was a quarrel." Poirot leaned forward gently. "A quarrel, monsieur?" The man nodded. "Between Lady Winthrop and her nephew. She objected to his presence in the portrait, though Sir Henry insisted. The atmosphere was most unpleasant. In the end, I developed the photograph, but I have no copies left. Only, well, perhaps a record in my ledger." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a heavy volume. Poirot scanned the entry with his sharp gaze. The names written in faded ink seemed harmless at first, but then his eyes gleamed. "Ah," he breathed. "C'est curieux." The order was placed not by Sir Henry, but by the nephew himself. He took the photograph and insisted on 2 copies. Poirot tapped the page. "One remains with Lady Winthrop, torn. The other, where is it now? That is the whisper we must follow." Back at the manor, Lady Winthrop received them with composed dignity. Her pale face betrayed no surprise at their questions, yet a faint tremor touched her hand as Poirot spoke of the missing half. "Madam," he said softly, "you have guarded a secret that bleeds through this photograph. I do not reproach you. I only ask, where is the other piece?" She pressed her lips tightly, then turned away. "I burned it," she whispered. "It was too painful." But Poirot, watching keenly, shook his head. "Non, madame. Forgive me, but you are not practiced in deceit. You did not burn it. It is hidden." Hastings gasped. "Hidden? But why?" Poirot's gaze lingered on Lady Winthrop. "Because it revealed a truth that frightened her. A truth about the nephew, perhaps, or another." The tension in the room grew thick, oppressive, until even Hastings fell silent. Lady Winthrop's shoulders shook faintly, but she uttered no further word. Poirot bowed courteously, then withdrew, leaving her alone with her grief. That evening, Poirot sat again in the library, his little notebook before him. The fire crackled, casting long, shifting shadows. "Hastings," he said gravely, "there is a pattern here. First, the torn photograph. Second, the quarrel. Third, the alibi that is too neat, too precise. These things converge." "Do you mean," Hastings said slowly, "that the nephew—" Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. In the ABC murders, you recall how the true culprit hid among a series of false leads. So it is here. But unlike that case, the mask is thin, very thin." The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted them. Inspector Grant entered, his face grim. "We found something." The nephew attempted to pawn a gold cigarette case last week. It bore the initials of Sir Henry. Poirot's eyes glittered. Just so. The net tightens. And yet, even as Hastings leaned forward eagerly, Poirot's brow furrowed. Still, it is too easy. Always beware the evidence that falls too neatly into place. It is like the shard of glass upon the carpet. It draws the eye, but it is not the whole window. The storm raged outside, lashing the windows with wind and rain. Within, Poirot remained motionless, listening not to the tempest, but to the faintest whispers of memory. The photograph, he murmured. It is not what it shows, but what it omits. Yes, yes. Shadows among the shards. His eyes narrowed, and in that moment, Hastings knew the little detective was drawing ever closer to the heart of the enigma, where grief and betrayal intertwined like the torn edges of the photograph itself. Chapter 5. The Whisper Revealed. The storm had passed by morning. A pale dawn filtered weakly through the windows of Winthrop Manor, touching the heavy curtains with a cold light. The house was unervingly still, as though it held its breath, waiting for truth to descend like the axe of judgment. Poirot sat at the great mahogany table in the drawing room, immaculate as ever, his mustache gleaming, his patent leather shoes catching the morning's wan glow. Hastings hovered anxiously by the hearth, his eyes darting from the door to his friend. Inspector Grant arrived shortly after, his boots wet with rain. "Well, Poirot," he said, his voice gruff, "you've called us here for the revelation. I do hope it is not another of your dramatic performances. The yard needs evidence, not poetry." Poirot inclined his head, a small smile curving his lips. "Evidence, Monsieur Inspector, is precisely what I offer. But allow me to present it in the manner that reveals not only the deed, but the soul behind it." Lady Winthrop entered last, pale and composed, her dark gown trailing like a shadow. She sank into a chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. All eyes turned to Poirot. "My friends," he began, his voice low, deliberate, each word carrying weight, "we are gathered to hear the whisper of truth, the murmur of a torn photograph that spoke louder than any witness." He held up the fragment, now encased in a neat envelope. Hastings leaned forward, scarcely breathing. "This photograph," Poirot continued, "was meant to be forgotten, torn, concealed, denied. Yet it remains, half a truth demanding its other half. I sought the missing piece, but it was not in ashes as Lady Winthrop claimed. Non, it was hidden in her escritoire beneath a false lining. There, I discovered it last night." Lady Winthrop gave a small cry, her hand flying to her mouth. Hastings stared. "You found it? And you didn't say a word, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "Huh? Hastings. To reveal too soon is to spoil the theater of the mind. The photograph, complete, shows not only Sir Henry and Lady Winthrop, but also the nephew, smiling, smug, with Sir Henry's watch chain gleaming in his vest. But there, beside him, is another figure, a woman, unnamed, unacknowledged, her presence torn away by Lady Winthrop's grief." Inspector Grant frowned. "A woman? What of it?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. This woman was no stranger. She was the nephew's accomplice. Together they sought Sir Henry's fortune. The quarrel over the photograph was not vanity. It was fear. Lady Winthrop recognized the danger, but dared not voice it. When Sir Henry was struck down, she suspected, but lacked proof. So she tore the photograph, as though by removing the face she could erase the truth. The silence was suffocating. Hastings felt the hairs on his neck rise. Poirot pressed on, relentless. The cigarette case pawned, the quarrel at the studio, the too perfect alibi, all pointed to the nephew. But it was the photograph that gave the final word. For it whispered not only of greed, but of betrayal. The accomplice was the housemaid, discreet, trusted, invisible. Together they planned. Together they killed. And when suspicion grew, the nephew attempted to cast all blame upon his aunt to shield himself. Yet the torn edges betrayed him. Grant swore under his breath. "The housemaid? By heaven, Poirot, you've done it again." Lady Winthrop's eyes brimmed with tears. I feared it was so. I saw her look at him once, as though he were her world. But I had no proof. Poirot bowed his head gently. "You love too much to see, madam. But now, justice must take its course." The inspector left swiftly, his boots echoing through the hall as he went to make the arrests. Hastings sank into a chair, still shaken. Extraordinary, Poirot. Absolutely extraordinary. And yet, I cannot help but feel a sadness. A photograph, a mere trifle of paper, bringing ruin to two lives. Poirot's voice softened. "Non, Hastings. It is not the photograph that destroys, but the choices of the heart. In sad Cypress, it was jealousy. In Death on the Nile, it was love twisted to cruelty. Always it is the same. The heart conceals, but the truth it whispers. And I, Hercule Poirot, I hear it." He closed the envelope with infinite care, placing it upon the table as one might place a relic in a shrine. The case was over, yet the shadows lingered. The house felt emptier, the air heavier, as though the whisper of the torn photograph would haunt it forever. Poirot rose, adjusted his cuffs, and with a final glance at Hastings, spoke softly, "Come, mon ami. Our task is done." And so concludes The Whisper of the Torn Photograph, a Hercule Poirot mystery. If you enjoyed unraveling the secrets alongside Poirot, don't let the story end here. Subscribe to the channel, share this mystery with a fellow lover of Agatha Christie's world, and tell us in the comments which Poirot case you'd like to hear next. Until then, remember, every silence has its whisper, and every detail hides a truth. The little gray cells never lie.